After the ashes settled on King's Landing, after Daenerys Targaryen had turned from breaker of chains to bringer of fire, Jon Snow stood amid a city of ruins and ghosts. The Red Keep smoldered behind him. The Iron Throne, once the object of countless wars and betrayals, lay melted into an unrecognizable sculpture of twisted steel. And the woman he once loved, the Dragon Queen, was dead by his own hand. Jon had always believed he didn't want power. He'd said it often. He'd even convinced himself it was true. But now, standing in the wake of so much destruction, he found himself at a crossroads. He was the trueborn son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. The rightful heir to the Iron Throne by blood. More than Daenerys, more than any living soul. But Jon didn't claim it. And that raised a question that echoed across Westeros: why didn't he? In the days following Daenerys's death, chaos spread through the capital like rot through a wound. The Unsullied, still loyal to their fallen queen, took Jon prisoner. Grey Worm was consumed with fury, wanting Jon's head. Tyrion was also locked away, awaiting judgment. It seemed the city teetered on the edge of another war. Yet even with the truth of Jon's lineage known to a few key people, no banners were raised in his name. No armies marched for Aegon Targaryen. The truth, as always, was messier than legend. In his cell, damp and cold beneath the remains of the Red Keep, Jon had plenty of time to think. He thought of Sam, who had risked everything to uncover the truth of his birth. He thought of Bran, now staring with unblinking calm into whatever future awaited. He thought of Arya, her blade always ready, and Sansa, sharp and proud as the North itself. And he thought of Daenerys. Her last breath, warm against his cheek, haunted him. He had chosen duty over love, but the choice had shattered something inside him. "Do you regret it?" Tyrion had asked him through the bars of his own cell. His voice was thin, worn down by guilt and sorrow. Jon didn't answer right away. "I had to stop her," he finally said, eyes cast to the floor. "She wouldn't have stopped." Tyrion nodded slowly. "Then you did the right thing. And sometimes, the right thing doesn't come with rewards." Jon scoffed. "Or a throne." "But you have a claim," Tyrion pressed. "A strong one. Stronger than hers ever was." Jon looked away. "It's not about blood." "That's exactly what it's about for the lords and ladies of Westeros," Tyrion said. "They follow power. And whether you want it or not, you have it." Jon's silence said everything. When the Council of Lords and Ladies finally gathered, summoned from across the realm to decide the fate of the Seven, or what was left of them, they expected a fight. They expected someone to rise. To demand the throne, or at least contest it. Jon Snow had both the right and the story, the bastard turned hero, the brother of the Night's Watch who united the wildlings, who fought the dead and won, who killed the Mad Queen. But he said nothing. Sansa, ever protective of her family, didn't push him forward. Arya, wild and distant, was already turning toward the sea. Sam suggested democracy and was laughed out of the moment. And Tyrion, clever as ever, made the play no one saw coming: he nominated Bran the Broken. Jon watched it all in silence. Later, after Bran was named king and Jon was sentenced to return to the Night's Watch, an order that barely existed anymore, people asked why he accepted it so quietly. He had every reason to stand and claim what was rightfully his. No dragons remained. No one stood in his way. Even the Unsullied, angry as they were, would soon leave Westeros. But he said nothing. Chose exile over rule. Chose the north, the cold, the silence, over the throne of his ancestors. Why? Because Jon Snow had seen what power did. He had watched friends burn. He had killed the woman he loved. He had led men to die, and buried them himself. Every time he stepped close to leadership, death followed. Every crown came soaked in blood. He didn't want to be king. But more importantly, he believed he didn't deserve to be. And perhaps, in his heart, he was still that bastard boy from Winterfell. A Stark in name, a Snow in truth. A leader in action, but never by title. The throne wasn't melted by dragonfire alone, it was melted by the cost of what it took to sit on it. And Jon Snow had already paid too much. The ship carrying the Unsullied left Blackwater Bay at dawn, sails stretched against the wind, Grey Worm standing at its bow, face expressionless. Their war was over, their queen gone, their justice served, though many would argue otherwise. Jon Snow watched the ship disappear from the cliffs above, standing beside Ser Davos, who had come to see him off before he returned to the wall. "They wanted you dead," Davos said quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I thought they'd never stop until your head was on a spike." Jon didn't answer. The wind tugged at his cloak, but he stood still, eyes locked on the sea. He wasn't thinking of the Unsullied. He wasn't even thinking of his sentence. His thoughts were deeper, heavier. The kind of weight that doesn't lift with time. "You could have been king," Davos added after a moment. "You had the name. The blood. Half the realm might have followed you without a second thought." Still, Jon said nothing. Davos turned toward him. "Why didn't you fight for it?" Jon's voice, when it came, was low. "Because I'm tired of fighting." Davos looked at him long and hard, then gave a slow nod. I suppose that's reason enough. But it wasn't. Not really. Tiredness was part of it, but not the whole of it. The truth went deeper, tangled in Jon's bones, in the very marrow of who he was. When he returned to King's Landing after killing Daenerys, he hadn't expected to survive. In fact, he had hoped for death. The Unsullied's blades, a mob's fury, anything. But death didn't come. Instead, they imprisoned him, locked him up like a man they didn't know what to do with. Perhaps that was fitting. No one knew what to do with Jon Snow. Not even Jon Snow himself. In the days that followed, as the city rebuilt itself in cautious silence, he had no visitors. Not at first. No ravens. No messages. No family. Just the distant noise of hammers on stone and a guard who brought him stale bread in silence. Then, one day, the door opened, and Sansa walked in. She was thinner than before, sharper in the cheekbones and the eyes. Her dress was northern black and grey, embroidered with the dire wolf of House Stark. She looked more queen than Sister Lo. She didn't embrace him. "You should have taken the throne," she said without preamble. Jon looked up from the bench he sat on, his beard unkempt, his eyes sunken. "I couldn't." "You could," she snapped. "You just wouldn't. There's a difference." He stood slowly. "And what would it have solved, Sansa? More blood? Another war? Another ruler people hate? You would have been different." "No," he said. "I wouldn't. Power changes everyone. It changed her. It would have changed me." She stared at him. "You think I don't know what power does? You think I haven't bled for every inch of it I hold?" Jon met her gaze. "I know. And I don't want to be a part of it anymore." The silence between them stretched, filled only by distant crows cawing outside the window. "You're still afraid of what you are," she said, softer now. "I'm afraid of what I become when I forget." "Forget what?" "That I'm just a man. That I make mistakes. That I kill people and regret it later. I don't want to sit on a throne that costs more lives than it saves." Sansa looked away then, toward the bars on the window. "The world doesn't care about what you want, Jon. I know. That's why I'm going back to the wall." Later, when she left him alone again, Jon felt no peace. Just acceptance. Like a man who walks into the snow and knows it will never stop falling. Tyrion visited him once more before his departure. "You know, if you'd pressed your claim, I would have supported you," the dwarf said, leaning on the doorway of the chamber. Jon gave small smile. "I know. You might have been a good king. Or a dead one. Maybe both, Tyrion agreed. But for what it's worth, I think the realm would have followed you. I don't want followers. Then maybe that's what made you worthy. They stood in silence for a long while. Then Tyrion added, you know what's funny? All those years I spent thinking the right person on the throne would fix everything. Turns out, no throne might be better. Jon nodded. Let it melt. And with that, he left King's Landing, not with a crown on his head, but with a burden on his soul. He rode north, toward the shattered remains of the wall, toward ghosts and cold winds and silence. But deep in his chest, where the fire of a dragon once flickered through his blood, Jon Snow carried the truth. He could have ruled. He chose not to. And he would carry the why with him, forever. The cold air of the north wrapped around Jon like an old, familiar cloak. As his horse trudged past the gates of Castle Black, he realized how little had changed. The black stone walls were still imposing. The wind still howled through the cracks. The snow still fell as if the world above the wall had no care for kings, thrones, or politics. And for the first time in a long while, that brought Jon some peace. Ghost met him just beyond the courtyard, silent, massive, loyal. The direwolf padded up to him with a low rumble in his throat and pressed his head against Jon's chest. Jon knelt, burying his fingers into Ghost's thick fur, holding onto him as if the world might slip away otherwise. No words were needed. They had both been through too much, lost too many. Tormund Giantsbane waited by the entrance to the great hall, arms folded, eyes bright even in the dim light. He grinned when he saw Jon. Well, well. Look what the ice dragged back. Jon cracked a tired smile. Didn't think you'd still be here. Tormund chuckled. Where else would I go? The south smells like piss, and they don't know how to drink. At least here, a man freezes honest. They embraced, two warriors reunited by the shared silence of survival. Jon looked past him toward the All's northern gate. Many wildlings still here. Aye. Some left, most stayed, Tormund replied. The free folk don't bend knees, but they know who kept them alive. They remember the man who bled for them. Jon shook his head. I'm no leader anymore. Tormund snorted. That's funny. You ride in like a ghost king, and say you're no leader. You ever think the more you run from it, the more it follows you? Jon didn't answer. He couldn't. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew it was true. As days passed, life at Castle Black returned to a kind of rhythm. It wasn't the Night's Watch of old, there were barely enough men to call it a watch. But they patrolled the walls, lit the fires, hunted for food, and watched the vast northern wilderness for signs of danger. And Jon did his part without complaint. But the silence of the cold couldn't drown out the noise in his head. At night, he dreamed of Daenerys. Of her eyes wide with betrayal. Of the way her body had gone limp in his arms. Of Drogon's scream, shaking the ruins of the Red Keep. Sometimes he dreamed of the throne melting, sometimes it was him sitting on it, and the ash was falling like snow. Other nights, he saw the people he couldn't save. Ygritte, arrow in her chest. Yora, falling in the sand. The boy Ollie, staring at him with hate. Even Robb, headless on the battlefield. Their faces mixed in the fog of his memory until he could hardly breathe. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind gray clouds, Jon sat atop the wall, Ghost beside him. He looked out beyond the white horizon. I don't know who I am anymore, he said quietly. Ghost let out a soft sound but said nothing, of course he didn't. But Jon felt the comfort of presence, of being seen even when words failed. A voice came from behind him. You're Jon Snow. He turned. It was Sam. Jon blinked, surprised. What are you doing here? Sam smiled awkwardly. Bran sent me. Said it was time someone reminded you that you're still part of this world. John chuckled darkly. Is that so? And what part is that? The exile? The murderer? The man who threw away a kingdom? Sam stepped forward, firm for once. You didn't throw it away. You chose not to take it. That's not weakness, John. That's strength. I don't feel strong. Maybe not, Sam said. But think about it, you were raised as a bastard, spent your life being told you were less than others, and when you finally learned you had more right than anyone to rule, you gave it up to protect the world from repeating its worst mistakes. John turned away, his eyes stinging. You think I did the right thing? He asked, voice breaking. Sam nodded. I think you did what most men couldn't. You chose peace when vengeance would have been easier. You chose the world over yourself. They sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, John whispered, I still wonder, if I could have done better. If I could have led better. If I should have tried. Sam looked at him with soft eyes. Maybe you could have. But maybe trying would have destroyed you. Maybe the price of that crown was more than even you could afford. John didn't answer. But that night, when he lay beneath the firs with Ghost at his feet, he slept without dreaming, for the first time in weeks. Not because the pain was gone. But because, for a moment, he believed there was still something left of himself to hold on to. The seasons began to shift in the north, though down in King's Landing, the change would hardly be noticed. But here, beyond the wall and in the crumbling halls of Castle Black, it meant something. The winds bit deeper. The snowfall thickened. And for Jon Snow, time passed without fanfare, no horns, no banners, no songs. Just cold days and colder nights. Word came slowly from the south. Ravens arrived from Bran's court in King's Landing, their messages neatly rolled and sealed with wax. Jon rarely read them. Sam did, though. He'd read them aloud when he felt Jon needed to hear what the world still looked like. Queen Sansa's keeping the North strong, Sam said one evening by the fire. Bran's holding peace better than anyone thought. Arya hasn't written, but they say her ship was last seen sailing west beyond the Sunset Sea. Jon stared into the fire but said nothing. Sam studied him. You're part of this family, you know. I gave that up, Jon murmured. No, you didn't. You just stepped aside. There's a difference. Jon took a slow breath. You ever wonder what would have happened if I claimed the throne? Sam hesitated. Sometimes. I think you would have made a good king. Jon laughed under his breath. Not joy, something sadder. A good king. A man who couldn't even keep the woman he loved from burning a city alive. You stopped her before she could do worse, Sam said softly. I stabbed her in the heart. Sam didn't flinch. Because no one else had the strength to. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you alone. Jon looked at him then. For a moment, the mask slipped. In his eyes was a deep, endless well of guilt that hadn't lessened since the day Daenerys died. I didn't want to be alone, he said. I know, Sam replied. But it was his choice, whether he admitted it or not. Outside the walls of Castle Black, the wildlings were preparing to head farther north. The long winter wasn't here yet, but they could feel the stirring of it. They wanted space, real freedom, beyond even the wall's crumbled shadow. Tormund approached Jon one morning as he was checking the gates. You should come with us, the wildling said. The north is wide. No kings. No queens. Just life. Jon gave a faint smile. Sounds peaceful. Tormund grinned. Aye. And boring. But peaceful, yes. Jon didn't answer right away. He looked out across the snow-covered hills. There was something calling to him in the distance. Not a voice, just a feeling. A quiet pull. Like the land itself was saying, come home. Maybe I will, Jon finally said. Later that night, he sat by the fire, alone now, Sam having left back to Old Town to help rebuild the archives. Jon held a piece of parchment in his hand, unsigned, unstamped. A letter never sent. Words he'd written to Bran but never had the heart to deliver. It read: "You did what I couldn't. You took the throne and turned it into something that might not kill the world. I hope you don't lose yourself in it. I hope you remember the things we lost to get there. I hope you forgive me for not standing beside you. Maybe I should've. Maybe I wasn't ready to carry that kind of fire anymore. I've had enough of kings." He folded it up and placed it near the fire. But he didn't burn it. Not yet. He walked the halls of Castle Black one last time that night. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Most of the brothers had gone, scattered, reassigned, or buried. The watch was a shadow of itself now, a symbol, not a force. There was nothing left to protect. No White Walkers. No wildling threat. No wall worth guarding. When the morning came, Jon saddled his horse. He didn't say goodbye. Not to the wall. Not to the ghosts in its stones. He rode out with Ghost at his side and a few of the wildlings close behind. Tormund led the way, cracking jokes about the cold and how soft southern winters couldn't touch the true north. But Jon wasn't riding toward exile anymore. He was riding toward a different kind of life, one without titles, expectations, or bloodlines. He didn't know what he'd find beyond the trees and the snow. But he knew one thing for sure. He would not rule. He would not kneel. He would simply live. The deeper Jon rode into the far north, the more the weight of the past seemed to fall away. Snow blanketed everything, thick and undisturbed, like the land had forgotten the noise of war. The trees stood taller here, darker, ancient. The wind whispered through them, not with menace, but with memory. This was no longer the realm of lords and thrones. This was the domain of wildness, of survival, of quiet truths that didn't need to be spoken. Tormund and the others built small camps along the way. Fires burned low at night, barely enough to warm their bones, but the company was enough. The wildlings laughed loudly, hunted fiercely, and drank from skins like the cold didn't matter. They didn't ask Jon to lead. They didn't call him King or Lord Snow. They called him friend. And that, perhaps, was all he had left. One night, as the sky glowed faint green from the northern lights above, Jon sat on a ridge with Ghost beside him. Below, the others slept, or pretended to. Tormund's snoring echoed across the snow like distant thunder. Jon watched the sky for a long time. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked softly. Ghost turned his head slightly, his red eyes flickering in the light. Jon took a slow breath. "I don't mean here. I mean, after all this. After death." He thought of the men he had killed. The people he couldn't save. Daenerys. Ygritte. Ollie. The wildling mothers and their children. All the faces he carried like ghosts in his chest. What came after all that? Did they wait for him? Did they curse his name in the dark? He didn't know. He only knew he'd been brought back once by the Lord of Light. And now that the Lord's chosen had all gone, Jon wondered if death would finally stay dead the next time. Tormund climbed the ridge behind him, holding a half-empty skin of ale. "Talking to your wolf again," he grunted as he sat beside Jon. "Better company than most," Jon replied with a small smile. Tormund took a swig and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "You've been quieter than usual. That's saying something." "I've got nothing left to say." Tormund looked at him for a moment, then said, "You know, you can stop punishing yourself any time now." Jon raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think I'm punishing myself?" "Because no one comes here unless they're running from something," Tormund said. "And you've been running since the moment you came back from the dead." Jon stared out at the frozen horizon. "Maybe I don't deserve to stop running. Tormund sighed. You think killing her was wrong? Jon didn't answer. Then tell me this, Tormund continued. If you hadn't stopped her, what would have happened? She would have burned more cities, Jon said quietly. More people, Tormund nodded. More innocents. So you made the hard choice. That's what leaders do. Jon shook his head. I don't want to be a leader. That's the whole point. Doesn't matter what you want, Snow. The people you saved, the ones who still follow you, they don't care about your blood or your name. They follow what you do. And you keep doing the right thing, even when it kills you inside. Jon let the silence stretch between them before speaking. Then maybe I'm cursed. Tormund laughed bitterly. No. You're just better than most of us, and that scares the shit out of you. Jon smiled faintly at that, but the truth of it cut deeper than he let on. In the following days, they reached the edge of the true north, farther than most had dared to go. The sun barely rose now, casting only a few hours of weak light. But the wildlings built their shelters, hunted mammoth, fished in frozen rivers. Children played in the snow. There was no crown here, no iron throne, no legacy. Just breath and blood and life. And slowly, Jon began to feel something strange. Not peace. But a kind of stillness. He helped build homes. He trained boys who wanted to learn to hunt. He helped deliver a baby when the healer fell ill. He stopped being the king who wasn't, and simply became a man with a name, and a wolf, and a worn-out sword. No one asked why he'd come north. No one cared what he could have been. They only saw what he chose to be now. And for the first time since he'd killed Daenerys, since he'd been sent away, since he'd heard the truth of his birth, Jon Snow didn't feel like a ghost anymore. He felt alive. The snow hadn't stopped for 3 days. Thick drifts piled against the sides of the rough wooden huts, burying doorways and coating rooftops in silence. The wind howled through the trees like it remembered some ancient grief. And still, life carried on. Fires stayed lit. The hunters left at first light and returned with meat. The children laughed and threw snow at each other. A woman Jon barely knew offered him a bowl of stew without saying a word. It was, in some strange way, the happiest Jon had seen people in years. And yet, even here, where thrones and banners meant nothing, the past had a way of finding him. Late one evening, after the snowfall had finally begun to thin, Jon sat by a fire sharpening Longclaw. The steel still gleamed as if it remembered battle. Ghost lay beside him, calm and alert. The flames danced, casting their flickers across the carved pommel, the white wolf. It felt more like a memory than a weapon now. He was alone until he wasn't. She was a good queen, came a voice from behind. Jon didn't turn immediately. The voice was familiar, but unexpected. When he did look, he saw a man cloaked in thick furs, a rough beard covering his face, and deep-set eyes that had seen too many winters. Dolorous Ed. Or what was left of him. For a moment, Jon didn't speak. He wasn't sure he could. You're dead, he said quietly. Ed shrugged. And you're dreaming. Or drunk. Depends on how much of that wildling ale you drank. Jon blinked, and Ed was still there. Sitting across the fire, warming his hands, his usual deadpan expression carved across his face like old stone. I buried you, Jon said. You buried a lot of people, Ed replied. Didn't stop them from staying with you. Jon stared into the flames. I never wanted this. I know, Ed said. But that's what made you dangerous. People like you, they don't want power, and that makes them better at holding it. Jon looked at him. Then why does it feel like I failed everyone? Because you survived, Ed said. That's the punishment. Jon didn't respond. He couldn't. Because deep down, in the part of him he tried to bury beneath frost and silence, he knew that was true. When he blinked again, Ed was gone. The fire crackled softly, and Ghost stirred, sensing his unease. Later that week, as the weather broke, a raven arrived from the south. It came with a limp wing and a scarred eye, clearly having survived something ugly. The letter was sealed with a simple wax stamp, a tree, encircled by a crown. Bran. Jon didn't open it right away. He left it on the table in the communal hall, unread, untouched, for 2 days. When he finally broke the seal, the parchment inside was short. It read, "Jon. I hope the North is kind to you. There are whispers already, lords debating lineage, speculations about bloodlines, your name in circles where it should not echo. You were right to walk away. But know this, walking away does not erase who you are. Be safe. Be still. Be free." Jon folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small pouch he kept near his bedroll. He didn't know what Bran meant exactly, but he felt the weight behind the words. His name still lingered in places he'd hoped to leave behind. Whispers traveled faster than armies. And history had a cruel habit of rewriting itself with or without permission. Tormund noticed the shift in him. "You thinking of going back?" he asked as they walked the edge of a frozen river one morning. Jon shook his head. "No. I'm thinking I might never really be gone." Tormund frowned. "You want them to forget you?" Jon stopped walking. The snow creaked under his boots. "I want them to stop needing me." Tormund looked at him for a long time before nodding. "That's not how stories work, Snow. People don't let go of ghosts. They carry them." That night, Jon sat by the fire with Ghost and watched the stars. They were clearer here, far from the smoke and fire of men. For the first time in a long while, he tried to picture a future, not just a past full of regret, but something forward. Something quieter. A life without war. Maybe even, someday, a life with joy. He didn't know what that looked like yet. But he knew one thing. The throne he never claimed would not define him. The blood in his veins didn't make him a king. The choices he made, those did. And up here, in the land of wind and snow, there was finally space to remember that he was still human. Just a man. Just Jon. The sun returned in pieces. Small slivers of golden light sliced through the clouds each morning now, no longer choked by endless snow. It meant spring was beginning its slow crawl into the far north, though here, spring was more of a rumor than a season. The snow didn't vanish. It just softened at the edges. Jon woke early most days. He wasn't sure why, habit, maybe. The kind of discipline carved into him during years at the wall, at Winterfell, and on the battlefield. But unlike before, he didn't rise to the sound of war horns or the pressure of command. Now he woke to feed the dogs, help rebuild shelters, and patrol the woods to ensure nothing dangerous lurked too close to the camp. He wasn't a soldier anymore. Not a king. Not a leader. But somehow, without titles, people still looked to him when something went wrong. When a young boy broke his arm falling from a tree, Jon was the one they called to set it. When two wildling clans argued over hunting territory, they came to Jon to mediate. And when a strange shadow moved through the northern trees one moonless night, no one questioned who would go out and investigate it first. Jon didn't want the responsibility. He never asked for it. But it came anyway, quiet, steady, like snow falling on your shoulders until you realize you've carried more weight than you meant to. Tormund saw it happening, too. One evening, while the camp shared food and ale around a large fire, Tormund leaned close and muttered, "You're doing it again." Jon raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Being the bloody leader. Fixing everyone's problems. Staring off into the distance like you're trying to figure out how to save the world again. Jon let out a quiet laugh. "It's not like that. It's always like that with you," Tormund grunted. "You could have gone into the woods and disappeared, but you didn't. You stuck around. And now look at you, Jon Snow, the king of the north that doesn't want a crown. Jon shook his head. I'm no king. You keep saying that like it'll make it true, Tormund replied, pulling a flask from his coat and taking a swig. But people see what they see. Jon didn't respond. Because deep down, he feared Tormund was right. Even here, in the quiet, away from lords and sigils and thrones made of melted swords, people gravitated toward him. They trusted him. Looked to him. And it scared him more than death ever had. That night, long after the others had gone to sleep and the fire had burned low, Jon stood alone at the edge of a cliff that overlooked the frost-covered valley. Ghost sat nearby, his ears twitching in the breeze. Jon clenched his fists as he stared out at the night. He could still feel her. Not physically, those days were long gone, but her presence haunted him. Daenerys. The weight of her death never left his chest. Sometimes he dreamed she was still alive, still standing beneath the Iron Throne, whispering promises about breaking the wheel. Other nights, he dreamed she forgave him. That she understood. But most nights, she just looked at him. And said nothing. Jon whispered to the wind, "You wanted to change the world. I just wanted to save it." He didn't know who he was speaking to, her, the gods, or just the emptiness. "I didn't press my claim because I was afraid," he said, slower now. "Afraid of becoming what we both became. Afraid of what power would do to me, what it did to you." Ghost let out a quiet breath behind him, a huff of white air in the cold. Jon continued, "I've lived too many lives already. Son of a Stark. Bastard of Winterfell. Lord Commander. Lover. Kinslayer. Heir to the throne. And now." He looked at his hands, scarred and calloused. "Now I just want to be a man again. No armies. No oaths. No more burdens that crush the soul." But part of him knew the world wouldn't let him go so easily. Power left a mark. Even when you turned your back on it. Just before dawn, he returned to his hut and opened Bran's old letter again, reading it slowly. The words hadn't changed, but they settled differently in his chest now. "Walking away does not erase who you are." He folded it carefully and placed it back in the pouch. Tomorrow, the wildlings planned to push farther north, beyond the mountains no map had named. Jon had promised to join them. Not because he had to. Not because anyone ordered him to. But because it was time to stop standing still. Because the further he walked into the unknown, the closer he might get to forgiving himself. They left at first light, the sky pale with thin streaks of orange as if the sun itself had to fight its way through the cold. The wildlings moved in loose formation, sleds pulled by dogs, wrapped in thick furs and laughter. They joked as they always did, even as they braced for the unknown. Tormund rode ahead with that same unshakable grin, while Jon stayed further back, Ghost padding silently beside his horse. The land ahead of them stretched vast and white, untouched by lords, war, or memory. Mountains rose in the distance, sharp and ancient. No map claimed this place. No banner had ever flown here. It was a world before names, before crowns, untamed and brutally honest. And somehow, it was exactly what Jon needed. Every mile north was a mile farther from what had been, the throne, the war, the woman he had loved and killed, the weight of bloodlines and prophecies that never came true. Up here, no one cared that he was Aegon Targaryen, the last male heir of House Targaryen. No one whispered of dragons. No one asked about the Iron Throne. Because out here, the only thing that mattered was survival, and maybe, just maybe, peace. A few nights into the journey, the wildlings made camp near a frozen lake. Jon helped pitch tents, gathered wood, and quietly mended a broken harness. He moved through the camp like one of them. Not above. Not below. Just a man with a sword and a past he didn't talk about. Tormund joined him by the fire that night, handing over a tin cup of bitter tea. "You've changed," he said. Jon looked up. Is that a good thing or a bad one? Tormund shrugged. Depends who you ask. South of the wall, they probably still tell stories about the man who walked away from a crown. Up here? You're just snow again. Jon smiled faintly. I like that better. Tormund nodded, taking a drink. You know, some people would have taken the power and justified it. Said it was for peace. Or justice. Or vengeance. I've seen what justifying power leads to, Jon said quietly. Aye, Tormund agreed. So have we all. The flames flickered between them, casting shadows that danced across the snow. After a long silence, Tormund asked, Do you regret it? Letting it go? Jon didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, into the glow and the crackle and the silence between each spark. Finally, he spoke. I regret that so many people died for something that never should have existed. The throne? Jon nodded. All those swords, all that blood, for what? A chair melted by dragonfire and remembered only in pain. Tormund leaned back and looked at the stars. You did what most people wouldn't. You walked away. That's not weakness. That's a kind of strength only the broken ones understand. Jon didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because the truth was, he had no regrets about refusing the crown. The regret came from everything it had cost him to get to that choice. Friends buried. Lovers lost. A part of himself killed each time he had to pick between duty and love. He had never wanted the throne, not because he was humble, but because he understood its curse. And yet, the world had nearly pushed it into his hands anyway. That was the cruel thing about power. Sometimes, the more you ran from it, the more it chased you. It whispered in the ears of others. It poisoned trust. It left a trail of corpses whether you claimed it or not. But Jon Snow had made his choice. He would not rule. He would not reign. He would live. They traveled on for weeks, past lands no Westerosi had seen. Past frozen rivers and forests thick with ancient trees. The wildlings sang songs that Jon didn't know. Children who had never seen a castle rode on sleds and laughed like the world had never been cruel. And Jon smiled more than he had in years. In time, the ache in his chest faded, not completely, but enough to let the air in again. He laughed at Tormund's filthy jokes. He taught a boy how to hold a sword. He hunted deer and fished in icy streams. He watched the northern lights with Ghost curled beside him, his hand resting on the wolf's fur like a tether to something real. And every so often, he would think of King's Landing, of Bran, of Arya, of Sansa ruling the north, of Sam buried in books, of Tyrion with his bitter wine. He hoped they were well. But he did not miss the throne. He did not envy it. Because here, in the land beyond names, Jon Snow had finally found what the Seven Kingdoms could never give him. Not power. Not glory. Not even redemption. Just peace. And after a lifetime of war, that was more than enough.